Order, please. Daily routine. Presenting and reading of petitions. The Honourable the Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition from the residents of Rockland and area in Pictou County concerning their bridge, and the operative clause reads as follows. Whereas the bridge at Rockland on the Middle River Road is in a poor state of repair, and whereas this bridge was damaged by flooding on March the 31st, 2004, and only temporarily repaired, and whereas this bridge is a vital transportation link for the residents of Rockland, Glengarry, and Concord districts, therefore it be resolved, the undersigned requests the government of the province of Nova Scotia repair or replace the said bridge as soon as possible. And it's signed by 112 residents of the area, and I too have affixed my signature.
The petition is tabled. The Honourable the Member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition of some 400 names plus. And the optimal phrase is to help save our public libraries. And we, the undersigned, are concerned citizens who urge our provincial leaders to act now and to provide funding increases in 2007-2008 to enable the Western Counties regional libraries to address the increasing costs so it can continue to provide quality library services. And Mr. Speaker, I have affixed my name.
The petition is tabled. The Honourable the Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition from the residents of the Terrence Bay area. 450 parents have signed a petition with the operative phrase.
Order, please. The chatter's a little loud.
The operative phrase in this petition is, we the parents are asking for the support of the Department of Education for the continuation of the swim program for this small elementary school in Terrence Bay. Mr. Speaker, there are 450 signatures and mine made 451. Thank you.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today is the start of the lobster fishing season for southwestern Nova Scotia, and whereas the hard work of our fishermen is the reason our province can offer and boast the best supply of cold water lobster in the world to the world, and whereas while we all worry about the effect of the strong dollar on resource industries like the lobster fishery, and will work with our fellow provinces and the federal government on possible solutions, the most important concern each day is the safe return of the fishermen and their boats. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House offer our best wishes to the lobster fishermen of southwestern Nova Scotia on Dump Day, and our hopes that during the season they haul in good catches and remain safe. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All in favour? Contrary-minded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2007 Operation Red Nose will again be driven by a dedicated troop of volunteers. And whereas Operation Red Nose offers those celebrating the holiday season a free ride home and ensures their car gets home too. And whereas this year the successful campaign will extend beyond its traditional metro base to now include Truro. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House salute the efforts of the IBC and its team of hundreds of volunteers whose efforts have undoubtedly saved lives and educates Nova Scotians about the dangers of drinking and driving. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour? Contrary-minded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the global theme for the 2007 World AIDS Day is leadership, with the ongoing campaign slogan of Stop AIDS, Keep the Promise, and the pandemic hit record levels in 2006 with 4,300,000 people becoming infected with HIV, more than any other previous year. And whereas 8,000 people die of HIV/AIDS worldwide every day, representing 25 million lives already lost to date around the world, and there is new HIV infections in Canada every 2 hours, with a total of 60,000 people living in Canada with HIV infection, including AIDS. And whereas in Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, 713 people have tested positive with HIV between 1985 and 2006, and there is a red ribbon display symbolizing the 8,000 daily deaths on Citadel Hill during this week. Therefore, be it resolved that this province of Nova Scotia join governments and people from around the world in a single effort to raise awareness about HIV and to express global solidarity in the face of the pandemic. The province does hereby proclaim the week of November 24th to December 1st to be Canadian HIV/AIDS Awareness Week, and December 1st, 2007 to be World AIDS Day in the province of Nova Scotia. And the province encourages all its citizens to work together to strengthen HIV awareness and prevention and to support those living with or affected by HIV/AIDS. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor? Motion is against. Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 16 days of activism to eliminate violence against women runs from November 25th to December 10th. And whereas the safety of women and children and all Nova Scotians is a fundamental value of government and everyone has a role to play. And whereas the Advisory Council has published a new edition of Making Changes in English and French with a new chapter for family and friends who want to help women in abusive relationships. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House share this guide, Making Changes and Changer pour le mieux, with their communities so that we can all play a role in stopping violence against women and their families. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor? Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas National Child Day was on November 20th and celebrated this year's theme, the right to be active, encouraging physical activity among children, and whereas this theme reflects Canada's commitments under the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, which recognizes children's right to be happy and enjoy the highest attainable standard of health. And whereas the Department of Community Services is encouraging physical activity and healthy child development through a new $4.9 million outdoor play space grant for licensed child care centres as part of our 10-year early learning and child care plan. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the importance of informing parents, caregivers and educators that physical activity is essential to the health and well-being of Nova Scotian children, which corresponds to the health and well-being of the future of this province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North on a introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw the attention of the House to the East Gallery. Representing the constituency of Dartmouth North is the 865th Dartmouth Kiwanis Air Cadets, and they are led by Captain Joseph Richards, Warrant Officer Warren Noseworthy, and Mr. Robert Shipman. And I'd like the House to give them a welcoming round of applause.
We welcome the Air Cadets and all visitors in the galleries here tonight. The Honourable the Minister. Introduction. The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for the floor. I'd like to introduce to the House healthcare workers who are in the gallery this evening, in the West Gallery, Mr. Speaker. They're here this evening to speak with some of the members on the government side and to inform them of the real crisis that exists in healthcare. David Lawrence, Karen Ferguson, Donald Vincent, Mamie Edwards, Marianne Welsh, Abby Harvey, Shauna Kearley, Susan Gadet, Karen Harrison, and Shauna Wilcox. And if they would stand, we'd welcome them here this evening.
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, congratulations on your ascension to the chair as Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Fred Walsh, a retired employee from the Department of Agriculture, has been appointed as member of the Order of Canada in recognition of his lifetime of volunteer service. And whereas Mr. Walsh has been very involved with the CNIB since losing an eye in a farming accident, and active with the Church, Salvation Army, and many other charitable organizations over the years. And whereas in recent years, Mr. Walsh has been providing informal counseling and encouragement to many in the farming community, especially some of the struggling sectors. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the legislature congratulate Mr. Walsh for his selfless work over the years and offer him best wishes on his continued and enjoyable retirement. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November's post-tropical storm Noel and severe flooding in several counties throughout the province in early September caused severe damage to provincial roads and bridges, whereas these roads and bridges serve as a vital transportation link to many communities across the province. Whereas Department of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal crews work swiftly, professionally, and efficiently to repair the damage and provide safe passage to residents and communities throughout the province. Therefore, be resolved, all members of this House recognize the Department staff and highway workers for their tremendous efforts in repairing the damage left in the wake of these storms. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice to pass without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded. Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources presents the Nova Scotia Woodlot Owner of the Year Award each year to recognize and reward landowners for outstanding stewardship of their woodland and to help encourage the practice of sustainable woodlot management. And whereas this year, Kevin and Susan Vino of Northfield, Lunenburg County were chosen as provincial winners from among 3 regional finalists. And whereas Kevin and Susan are not only excellent woodlot managers, but also the first in Eastern Canada to be certified organic Christmas tree growers. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the outstanding achievement of Kevin and Susan Vino and thank them for their enthusiastic and innovative approaches to woodlot management in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Needham on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw the attention of the members to the West Gallery, East Gallery, West Gallery, the West Gallery. With us this evening, we have the president of CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, Danny Kavanagh, and I believe he's accompanied by healthcare professionals who are part of the negotiating or executive of CUPE here with us tonight. And I'd ask them to stand and for members to give them a warm welcome.
The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if I'd be allowed to make an introduction before I do my resolution.
Please do.
Mr. Speaker, through you to all members of the House, we have in the West Gallery, or the East Gallery rather, the Mayor of the town of Mulgrave, Mr. Leonard MacDonald, and the CEO for the town of Mulgrave is with him as well. So I'd ask the House to Give them a warm welcome. On a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the town of Shelburne hosted the 10th annual Aquaculture Harvest Fest on September the 15th, 2007, and whereas the Aquaculture Harvest Fest was initiated in 1998 to celebrate the past, present, and future successes of aquaculture enterprises in Nova Scotia, and whereas the annual Harvest Fest showcases local aquaculture products and allows community members to sample Nova Scotia cultured seafood and enjoy local entertainment. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House thank the town of Shelburne for their generous hospitality and congratulate them on the successful Aquaculture Harvest Fest. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contraminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Atlantic Agriculture Hall of Fame honors members of the agriculture community for outstanding contributions to industry, community, and farm organizations, and whereas the late Alistair Marshall was inducted into the Atlantic Agriculture Hall of Fame in a ceremony in October at the Nova Scotia Agriculture College, and whereas Mr. Marshall, who was born in Trenton-Pictou County, and graduated from the Nova Scotia Agriculture College, McDonald College, and University of Guelph, worked for 26 years with the Department of Agriculture, and also served on the board of Scotia Gold Cooperatives and the Nova Scotia Fruit Growers Association. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House recognize the outstanding contributions made by Mr. Marshall to our agriculture sector and extend congratulations to his family. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister on the Advisory Council for the Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women is on December 6th, and whereas the Purple Ribbon Campaign of the Transition House Association of Nova Scotia will commemorate the 16 days of activism to eliminate violence against women from November 25th to December 10th, and whereas the Transition House Association of Nova Scotia has initiated the Clothesline Project to give women who have experienced violence a chance to express themselves through art and to commemorate the 16 days of activism to eliminate violence against women from November 25th to December 10th. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledges, recognizes, and appreciates the strength and courage of survivors and their families and the dedication and compassion of the Transition House Association of Nova Scotia and its members for the work to help women and their children facing violence. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded? Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to introduce two of my most favorite people in the world that are visiting today, and I ask the members to give them a warm welcome to my parents. Traveled here today from Shelburne, Frank and Vivian Scott. I know they're sitting up there very proudly, and I'm certainly proud to have them here with me today. Thank you, and I ask for your warm welcome.
The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Glenn Cook is the CEO of Cook Aquaculture Incorporated, and whereas Mr. Cook's vision has helped grow Cook Aquaculture into the largest, fully integrated, and independent salmon farming company in North America. Yeah. And whereas Cook Aquaculture has operations in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Maine, with more than 1,300 employees. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Glenn Cook for being named Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year for 2007 for the Atlantic region. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Good. There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that at a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas every spring for the last 11 years, Shirley and David Whiston of Halifax have started their annual camping season by collecting information and maps from tourist centres and by compiling lists of church suppers, fairs, plays, concerts, museum displays, and other special events occurring in Nova Scotia. And whereas Shirley and David Whiston do this because they are valued and dedicated members of the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources Campground Host Program. And whereas all campground hosts help visitors to this province and other campers by offering information about the facilities and programs in the park, the surrounding community, and in all of Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this host show their appreciation for the 10 years of volunteer service by the Whistons and for all the campground hosts like them who are great ambassadors of this beautiful province. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 214 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Human Rights Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 214 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Human Rights Act.
Bill 16, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 214 of the Revised Statutes 1989, Human Rights Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
I wonder if I might be allowed an introduction before I introduce my bill.
By all means.
I just noticed, Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, a former member of this House, John DeVoe, and Carol DeCourcy, who is with him today. I wonder if the House might greet them and welcome to the House tonight. To introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 31 of the Acts of 1996, the Sales Tax Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 31 of the Acts of 1996, the Sales Tax Act.
Bill 17, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 31 of the Acts of 1996, the Sales Tax Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 7 of the Acts of 1996, the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 7 of the Acts of 1996, the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
Bill 18, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 7 of the Acts of 1996, the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Class Proceedings.
The Honourable Minister wishes to table a bill entitled An Act Respecting Class Proceedings.
Bill 19, entitled An Act Respecting Class Proceedings.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Protection and Portability of Health Insurance.
The Honourable Member begs leave to table an act entitled An Act Respecting the Protection and Portability of Health Insurance.
Bill 20, entitled An Act Respecting the Protection and Portability of Health Insurance.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may, a few introductions before I introduce my bill.
Please.
Some of these, Mr. Speaker, I apologize, some of these people may already have been introduced, but it's important enough that they be introduced twice, I feel. The reason that they're here, as a matter of fact, they're all healthcare workers and members of CUPE who are here to bring the real issues of healthcare to this legislature and make sure that the government is aware of those real issues, Mr. Speaker. The following members are in the gallery, Mr. Speaker. Bev Connors, Ruth Thompson, Barbara Hall, Vivian Scott, June Scott, Sean Foley, and Danny Kavanagh. And I would ask them all to stand, please, and receive a warm welcome of the House of Assembly. I'm not leaving Sean out. I introduced her the last time. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting a Mental Health Court Program in the Provincial Court of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member begs leave to table an act entitled An Act Respecting a Mental Health Court Program in the Provincial Court of Nova Scotia.
Bill 21, entitled An Act Respecting a Mental Health Court Program in the Provincial Court of Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to table an act entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Bill 22, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, Municipal Government Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce an act respecting a domestic violence court program in the Provincial Court of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member begs leave to table a bill entitled An Act Respecting a Domestic Violence Court Program in the Provincial Court of Nova Scotia.
Bill 23, entitled An Act Respecting a Domestic Violence Court Program in the Provincial Court of Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable, the official leader of the opposition.
Okay,
Let's try that.
Like that.
The Honourable, the leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wade Ferris immigrated to Nova Scotia as a teenager, earning his engineering degree from the Technical University of Nova Scotia and starting a successful career here. And whereas today the W.M. Ferris Group provides design, planning, construction, and property management services with an estimated $300 million in current projects. And whereas it was recently noticed that Wade Ferris has spent 30 years proving that immigration contributes to our economy and job creation, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Wade Ferris on becoming the first Nova Scotian to be honored as the Businessman of the Year by the Canadian Lebanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those against, motion is carried. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in the mid-1980s, a group of concerned citizens saw the need for a program to assist at-risk and homeless youth in Halifax and the surrounding area, and whereas Phoenix youth programs have grown to include Phoenix Shelter for Youth, Phoenix Oaks, and Phoenix Learning and Employment Center, and whereas on October 18, 2007, the Phoenix Youth Program celebrated 20 years of providing programs by hosting a reception at Pier 21 to recognize donors, sponsors, volunteers, clients, staff, supporters, and community partners. Therefore, be it resolved that the hosts of Assembly recognize the great work of Phoenix Youth Programs and wish them continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary-minded? The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Billy Smith of Cambridge, Hants County, is being called a hero for his precise and immediate actions following a car accident in Bramber on the afternoon of November 12. And whereas Billy Smith was traveling with his wife when they came upon a tragic accident near the Bass Creek Bridge, which resulted in the death of one man and Mr. Smith pulling a 14-year-old girl from the burning wreckage. And whereas, as a result of Mr. Smith's actions, I am pleased to be working with the Somerville Fire Department and Chief Ron Spencer in submitting the necessary information to the Office of the Governor General Michel Jean to nominate Mr. Smith for a Canadian Medal of Bravery. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the tremendous sacrifice Mr. Smith put himself at in pulling the young teenager from the burning car and saving her life. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor? Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Heather Tufts, a 1980 graduate of Sir John A. Macdonald High School, was a proud supporter and volunteer for the Sir John A. Flames football team, whereas in her memory, Heather's family donated the scoreboard clock at our new school athletic field as a lasting memory to this special woman and mother, whereas daughter Kayla, who graduated in '97, son Robbie, a grade 12 student and a member of the Flames football team, and husband Greg follow Heather's example of continuing commitment to Sir John A. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate and thank the family of Heather Tufts for their generosity in donating the scoreboard clock for the new athletic football field and for their continuing commitment to Sir John A. Macdonald High School. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded? The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Bronze Star is awarded to any person who, while serving in any capacity in or with the Army of the United States, distinguished himself or herself by heroic achievement of service, and whereas the elite U.S. Canadian Special Forces unit, commonly called the Devil's Brigade, was the first of its kind, and its 1,800 members are credited with paving the way for modern elite forces. And whereas Aubrey Spidell of Mahone Bay recently received this prestigious distinction from the United States Army, having served overseas with the Cape Breton Highlanders during World War II and volunteering for the Devil's Brigade. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate Aubrey Spidell for his recent honor, for serving his country and the Allied forces so proudly, and for being an example of courage and valor. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded? The motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas September 14th, 1934 was an exceptionally special day in the lives of Hector and Rhodina Macaulay, as they joined hands in marriage. And whereas Hector and Rodina celebrated another special day on September 14th of this year when they marked their 73rd wedding anniversary. And whereas Rodina, who is now a resident at the Alderwood Rest Home in Benek, was joined by Hector on September 14th for an enjoyable reception hosted by family and friends, marking the culmination of 73 years of marriage. Therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly take this moment and recognize the true meaning of 73 years of happily wedded bliss, while wishing Hector and Rodina many future years of happiness together. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor? Aye. Those against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Friday, November the 23rd, 2007, the Right Reverend Sue Moxley was installed as Diocesan Bishop for the Anglican Diocese of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, the first woman to be elected to that position. And whereas Bishop Moxley is widely respected and admired for providing a moral compass on a variety of difficult and potentially divisive issues both within the Church as well as in the secular community. And whereas Bishop Moxley was serving as minister of St. Mark's Anglican Church in Halifax's North End, courageously providing sanctuary for Sanja Petchel of Kosovo for 441 days during Ms. Petchel's successful quest to become a Canadian citizen. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly extend congratulations and best wishes to Bishop Moxley on her election and installation as Diocesan Bishop for the Anglican Dioceses of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation is the leading national volunteer-based organization in Canada dedicated to creating a future without breast cancer. And whereas on September 30th, 2007, in 53 communities across Canada, thousands of Canadians walked and ran together in the name of finding a cure for breast cancer. And whereas $26.5 million was raised nationally by 170,000 participants in this year's event, with 8,236 Nova Scotians participating to help raise a record $1,070,000. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the brave men and women who face this illness and support the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation in their continued struggle to overcome breast cancer. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Pictou County power lifter Leanne Dowling recently claimed the bronze medal, and whereas the bronze medal is Leanne's fourth world distinction in a career that spans over 14 years, and her recent win took place in Germany in a competition that featured competitors from more than 25 different countries. And whereas Ms. Dowling was impressed with the German venue as it was held in a modified swimming pool with the latest technology that featured the lifting platform supported by steel girders in the middle pool. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send their warm congratulations to Pictou County powerlifter Leanne Dowling on her recent bronze medal win in Germany. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I be permitted an introduction, please?
By all means.
Thank you. In the West Gallery, and I ask them to stand, are Jolene and Don Gordon, well-known Dartmouthians. Jolene, I'm going to recognize shortly in my resolution, but she's an internationally known textile artist. And Dr. Gordon is an equally well-known marine scientist and has served 34 years as a volunteer member of the Dartmouth Lakes Advisory Board. And we're very pleased to have them as residents of Dartmouth. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jolene Gordon, basketry and textile artisan, was awarded Nova Scotia's prestigious 2007 Portia White Prize, recognizing her, quote, promotion of excellence, innovation, and expression in the arts, end of quote. And whereas Jolene's traditional and decorative basketry and teaching have earned her an international reputation. And whereas Jolene has helped preserve and promote Nova Scotia's traditional basketry, including Acadian, African Nova Scotian, and Mi'kmaq styles through her research, publications, teaching, and founding of the Nova Scotia Basketry Guild. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate Jolene Gordon of Dartmouth, 2007 Portia White Prize winner, and thank her for both her textile artistry and preservation of Nova Scotian traditional basketry. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor? Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the holiday season is fast approaching, and whereas the holiday season is a time for Nova Scotians to relax and gather with friends and family, and whereas Nova Scotians are unsure as to whether or not they will have to work due to indecisiveness and a lack of leadership by the Premier and his Conservative Party, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly urge the Premier to do what's right and act in the best interest of Nova Scotians by preserving statutory holidays in this province and giving hard-working Nova Scotians the time off that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The notice is tabled. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May 30th, 2007, the community of Sydney Mines received the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers Milestone Award. And whereas this award is in recognition of the technical breakthrough it achieved in participating in the first transatlantic telephone cable, TAT-1, and whereas Councillors Gordon MacLeod and Clarence Prince of the Cape Breton Region Municipality unveiled the plaque at a ceremony held in Sydney Mines, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating the community of Sydney Mines on receiving this award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contraminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June the 22nd, 2007, I had the pleasure of attending the 22nd anniversary of the Dartmouth General Hospital Charitable Foundation's annual lobster dinner and auction. And whereas support for the lobster dinner was established many years ago and has provided funds for priority medical equipment needs at the hospital, and whereas the funds raised this year will be used towards the purchase of a new digital echocardiograph lab, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the Dartmouth General Hospital Charitable Foundation and all those who support them in their endeavours to provide enhanced care for our communities. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contraminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the East Preston United Baptist Church was founded on September the 12th, 1842 by Reverend Father Richard Preston, the founding father of African Baptist Association. Whereas to this day, the East Preston United Baptist Church remains stable to the community, hosting weekly services, embracing a new building program, and growing with new ministries. And whereas in September of this year, the congregation of the East Preston United Baptist Church celebrated its 165th anniversary of worship and fellowship with a number of special events. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly recognize the accomplishment of the East Preston United Baptist Church and commend the church and its congregation on 165 years of providing outstanding leadership to the community. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor? Aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Adam Rogers led the Guysborough Broadhorn softball team to their second consecutive AGR League title, and whereas Adam was voted the MVP of the AGR playoffs and the top pitcher during the regular season, and whereas Adam has previously been a member of the provincial and national softball teams. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Adam and the Guysborough Broadhorns for their successful season. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded. The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2007 Pictou North Colchester exhibition was highlighted by the event Year of the Queens, which reunited all former queens crowned at the exhibition dating from 1951 to the present. And whereas the idea for the project came from Helen Robinson, and months of research on past crowned queens was undertaken by Dorothy McIntosh, culminating in her popular book Queens of the Fair, 1951 to 2006. And whereas more than 30 former queens, including the first crowned queen from 1951, Jean Hemphill MacDonald of Pictou, were able to attend this year's exhibition at various events, including opening ceremonies, a meet and greet, and a gala event before the crowning of this year's Miss X 2007, Michelle McLean of Hopewell. Therefore, be resolved, this House of Assembly commend Helen Robinson on her initiative and congratulate Dorothy McIntosh for all her efforts in contacting and researching former crowned queens of the fair, along with recognizing the Pictou North Colchester exhibition for hosting this successful event. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor? Aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Kent Cadigan, organizer of the Recovery Ride, donates to the Glace Bay High School for use of a scholarship for an abuse survivor at the school. And whereas the Recovery Ride is a 3-day bicycle ride of the Cabot Trail, raising awareness of abuse and to help further the education of an abuse survivor. And whereas Bill Smith of the DAM Fitness Center is a major sponsor for the Recovery Ride, and along with Dr. Cadigan, they presented a check for $4,200 to Glace Bay High School. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize Dr. Kent Cadigan of Glace Bay for organizing the Recovery Ride. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Army Cadet Leadership Instructor Drill and Ceremonial Course was held at CFB Gagetown during the summer months, and whereas Sergeant Joshua Adshade from Army Corps 1859 Spring Hill, grandson of Jim and Eudora Adshade of DeBert, represented his local cadet corps at this course, winning several awards, and whereas Joshua was appointed Regimental Sergeant Major for the graduation parade and commander of the drill team, which captured first place in the drill team competition. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House extend their congratulations to Sergeant Joshua Adshid, who won the J.E. Vance CMMCD Leadership Award for being selected top cadet out of over 1,300 cadets. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 12th Annual Chronicle Herald Holiday Parade of Lights brought out a record-breaking 100,000 spectators in Halifax, and whereas floats created by Farmers Dairy and the Children's Wish Foundation, the Halifax Regional Municipality, and Pete's Fruitique were judged to be among the top 3 floats in the parade, and whereas 4,000 new unwrapped toys, $20,800 in cash donations, and 3,040 kilograms in non-perishable food items were collected along the parade route for children and their families in need. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the Downtown Halifax Business Commission, the generous volunteers and donors, the 50 marching bands, majorettes, costume working groups, and creators of floats that lit up the evening at the 2007 Chronicle Herald Parade of Lights. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Clare.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the option of the following resolution. Whereas for more than a decade, continuing care organizations in Nova Scotia have recognized the month of September as Continuing Care Month, and whereas a promotional campaign was led to increase public awareness and understanding about continuing care organizations, the programs and services they deliver, and the important role they play in the lives of the people they serve. And whereas continuing care programs and services help people to maximize their independence, promote their well-being, sustain or enhance their quality of life, and support families to meet the ongoing care needs of their loved ones, therefore be resolved that members of this House recognize and pay tribute to continuing care employees and the many dedicated volunteers for their commitment to providing high-quality care and the energy and compassion they bring to this important work they do. Mr. Speaker, I would ask waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contraminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cobequid Education Centre Cougars are the 2007 Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation Tier 1 football champions. Whereas the Cougars beat top seed Citadel Phoenix 50-2 to win the title, and also to avenge their Turkey Bowl loss, which was the only blemish on their 2007 record. And whereas in 2007, the CEC Cougars won their second consecutive NSSAF Tier 1 football championship. I couldn't pronounce it much better last year either, Speaker. Football championship, and the 14th in the school's reach athletic history. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House congratulate the 2007 CEC Football Cougars organization, players, coaches, trainers, equipment people, parents, fans, and other supporters on winning the Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation Tier 1 Football Championship, and at the same time congratulate Cobequid Education Centre for combining excellence in athletics with excellence in academics. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Hibernia Atlantic submarine fiber optic cable was laid in 2000 to carry digital information across the North Atlantic, linking England, Ireland, the US, and Canada by telephone and internet. And whereas the Hibernia cable makes its Canadian landfall at Herring Cove, while 4 other cables have their junction at Pennant Point, linking New Jersey, Spain, France, England, Denmark, Iceland, Canada, and the Faroes. And whereas Inmarsat, originally sponsored by the United Nations, operates a satellite station at Pennant Point, following on the earlier Army communications station established at Pennant during World War II, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize Halifax Atlantic's strategic importance in intercontinental communications and resolve to build on the area's long and productive heritage in this field. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Inspiring Lives Awards were presented by the Nova Scotia Mental Health Foundation to individuals who have overcome tremendous obstacles in their lives and inspire others to reach their full potential. And whereas on May 7, 2007, Alan MacDonald won the Inspiring Lives Award in recognition of his commitment to helping others overcome their addictions. And whereas Alan has taken his experience with addictions and his gift of love, empathy, understanding, hope, forgiveness, and kindness and reached out to others who are in need. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House recognize the efforts Alan MacDonald has made to improving not only his own life, but the lives of others, congratulate him for the Inspiring Lives Award, and wish him every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year the House of Assembly chooses a talented local artist's work to adorn the legislative Christmas card, and whereas this year Watercolor by well-known artist Dorothy Mosier, mother of HRM Councillor Linda Mosier, was commissioned, and whereas the Christmas winterscape of the province host so eloquently depicts this wonderful provincial landmark, Mr. Speaker, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House thank Dorothy Mosier for her masterful work bringing the joy of Christmas season forth on this 2007 greeting card. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? A motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Bob Noss has dedicated his life to sport in Nova Scotia with a special passion for basketball that inspired him to coach the province's first mini boys basketball team and help create what would eventually become Bedford Minor Basketball with its well-known Bedford Classic Basketball Tournament. And whereas Bob Noss's 3 decades of coaching mini basketball in Bedford and his countless hours dedicated to his teams earned him Basketball Nova Scotia's 2007 Frank Baldwin Award, and whereas Bob Noss's lifelong dedication to sport was recently honored by Recreation Nova Scotia's highest distinction, an honorary life membership award. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize Bob Noss for his contribution to sport in Nova Scotia and congratulate him upon his awards, which also earn him recognition within the Nova Scotia Sports Hall of Fame. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Mental Health Association Halifax Dartmouth branch held its 9th annual Mosaic for Mental Health art exhibit and sale from October 17th to the 28th at the Craig Gallery at Alderley Landing in Dartmouth. And whereas the event was the most successful in the history of the fundraiser and was organized by the small but dedicated staff and volunteers of the organization, and whereas the event raises money for the more than 400 individuals experiencing mental health issues who rely on the programs and services of CMHA Halifax Dartmouth. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Canadian Mental Health Association Halifax Dartmouth branch on their most successful Mosaic for Mental Health art exhibit and sale in support of the hundreds of individuals who rely on the invaluable programs and services provided by the dedicated staff of CMHA. I would ask for a waiver, Mr. Speaker.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Raise Inc. of CJLS, an independently owned and operated radio station in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, traveled to Boston, Massachusetts to report on the Nova Scotia Christmas tree lighting event there in 2006, and whereas Mr. Zink's broadcast article on Nova Scotia Christmas in Boston received both Atlantic Region and national awards in the category for the radio station which, in the opinion of the judges, displayed an outstanding and creative use of sound to tell the news story from the Radio and Television News Directors Association of Canada. And whereas in making the decisions, the judges noted that the awards were clear standouts in their categories. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate CJLS Radio and Raise Inc. in particular for receiving this honor for the continued high degree of excellence they achieve daily in their broadcasts. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the community of Queens County recently made life a little bit easier for the mother of Zachary and Tyler Moores of Milton, Nova Scotia, both born with cerebral palsy, when a new van complete with a wheelchair ramp was presented to the Moores family. And whereas a volunteer committee organized a huge fundraiser which raised the money for the purchase of this van. And whereas this committee received donations from the President's Choice Children's Charity through the Liverpool Market Superstore, Q104's Children's Trust Fund, Bowaters Employees Safety Points, Bowaters Pipe Fitters, Milton Centennial School, David Hatt Jr. of Hatt's Car Sales, many additional businesses, individuals, and craftspeople with their donations to an auction held in June, along with every community charitable organization. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend the volunteer committee of Sharon McKenzie, Bernd Walther, Lena Oikel, Alda Frank, and their chair, Barb Foley, for recognizing the Moores family need for a specialized vehicle and through whose hard work and dedication helped raise the funds necessary to purchase the new vehicle. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in December 1999, at their 54th session, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution declaring November 25th the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And whereas since its inception, more than 1,700 organizations in 130 countries have used the annual campaign as an opportunity to call attention to gender-based violence and to the need for better resources to assist those affected. And whereas 2007 marks the 17th annual recognition of the 16 days of activism against gender violence, which is observed by activities such as demonstrations, protests, marches, and vigils. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize November 25th as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and acknowledge those who continue to fight to eliminate gender-based violence. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas improved health care and lifestyles depends on the research which takes place in Nova Scotia and across Canada, and whereas medicine plays a significant role in treating diseases and improving health, and whereas Bridgewater native Dr. Neil McKinnon, a pharmacist and associate professor at Dalhousie's College of Pharmacy, is among only 13 people in the world to receive the 2007 Harkness Associate. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Dr. Paul McKinnon for his achievement and for his study of medication errors and whether government and private payer drug policies improve safety and quality. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 16-year-old Stacy Lynn Hutt of Sackville was a victim of school bullying and wrote a song titled Beautiful to thank her mother for the support and received an honorable mention in the 11th annual Unison International Songwriting Contest for her song Good Morning. And whereas Stacy Lynn represented Nova Modeling and Talents Team Canada in the World Championships of Performing Arts held in Hollywood, California, and received 2 golds, a silver, and a bronze. And whereas Stacy Lynn also received 3 gold awards for modeling and an industry award for her potential in the industry and won the overall world championship title. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate Sackville 16-year-old Stacy Lynn Hutt on overcoming school bullying and achieving awards for her songwriting and modeling in the World Championships of Performing Arts held in Hollywood, California, and where Stacy Lynn continued success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for the last year, the Nova Scotia Liberal Caucus has worked diligently with community groups and campaigned against the burning of tire for fuel to protect our environment and citizens in Nova Scotia. Whereas last week, the Advisory Committee appointed to review used tire options returned a report stating that the province should examine and undertake alternate methods for disposal of tires other than burning them. And whereas we all are well aware that burning tires does not mean recycling tires, yet it took this Conservative government over a year of countless meetings and discussions and many taxpayers' dollars to come up with this decision. Therefore, we resolve that government actually examine viable and environmentally friendly methods to dispose of nearly 1 million used tires produced in this province each year, and apologize to the people of Nova Scotia for wasting their time and money on a matter they could have easily resolved 1 year ago. And it asks for waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The notice is tabled. The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Nova on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make an introduction this evening in the West Gallery. A neighbor of mine grew up in Whitney Pier. Glad to see him taking in the proceedings tonight. And David Lawrence from Whitney Pier, who now lives in Sackville, is here this evening. And warm welcome in the house.
Thank you. The Honourable the Member for Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ricky Banks of Shake Harbor Bear Point Volunteer Fire Department received recognition from the Office of the Fire Marshal for his 25 years of service, and whereas October the 25th, 2007, Ricky was awarded the Fire Service Long Service Medal at a special ceremony hosted in Truro, Nova Scotia, And whereas the Minister of Environment and Labor presented Ricky with the Fire Service Long Service Medal Award, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Ricky Banks on being named recipient of the Fire Service Long Service Medal and for faithfully servicing Shake Harbor, Bear Point Volunteer Fire Department and surrounding communities in their time of need. Mr. Speaker, I request waivers of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Counterminded? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Sports Hall of Fame held their 2007 induction ceremony in Halifax, October 19, 2007, and whereas Penny Larocque was inducted into this year's ceremony in recognition of her remarkable career in curling, and whereas Penny has been Nova Scotia's provincial champion 6 times, won the Canadian National Women's Competition twice, placed 3rd at the World Championship, and has won 5 seniors women's titles. Therefore, it be resolved that members of this House recognize the remarkable career Penny Larocque has had in curling, congratulate her for her induction into the Nova Scotia Sports Hall of Fame, and wish her success in future endeavors. And, Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Pictou County Early Intervention Association is a non-profit agency that provides services to preschool children with developmental delays, enabling these children to enter school with a significant positive impact. And whereas the families of these children also receive supportive help, including much-needed transition service when the children enter the school system. And whereas the Pictou County Early Intervention Association is celebrating its 10th year of operation with successful early intervention for children and their families. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly acknowledge the tremendous difference the Pictou County Early Intervention Association has on the developmental progress of participating children, and wish the Pictou County Early Intervention Association every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Lieutenant Governor's Awards are presented to 1 female and 1 male student at each school who have excelled in their studies, shown great leadership and service to the community and schools. Whereas Alexandria Kimberly Burton, a grade 11 student from West Kings District High School, has received the Female Lieutenant Governor's Award in recognition of her excellent academic record and extracurricular activities. And whereas Alexandra is extremely active in both school committees and athletic teams, as well as completing her bronze level in the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, and is presently working on the silver level, therefore be it resolved that members of the House congratulate Alexandria Kimberly Burton for receiving the Lieutenant Governor's Award, wish her continued success in future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tom Harms is the chair of the board for the Eastern Passage community newspaper, The Beacon, which hosts the Beacon Wall of Recognition, a feature that recognizes individuals in the community that have enriched the lives of others within it. And whereas the Beacon Wall of Recognition recognized Steve Larkin as the 2007 recipient. And whereas Steve Larkin, a World War II veteran, founding member of many volunteer organizations, and a dedicated volunteer, is an inspiration to the community of Eastern Passage through his dedication to community service. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend Tom Harms, the chairman of the board for the Beacon and the Beacon Wall of Recognition, for recognizing outstanding members of the community, and extend congratulations to Steve Larkin as being named to the Beacon Wall of Recognition for his life's dedication to enriching the lives of others in the community of Eastern Passage. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October the 16th, 2007, the Sydney and Area Chamber of Commerce held its 18th Annual Excellence in Business Awards ceremony. And whereas Tasso Snifanakis received the Business Person of the Year award. And whereas in 1982, Mr. Snifanakis opened the first of 4 video entertainment centers on Prince Street in Sydney, Nova Scotia, and now owns Platinum Fitness Gym in North Sydney. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Tasso Snifanakis on receiving the Business Person of the Year award, a prestigious award which symbolizes Tasco's dedication and exemplary contribution to his community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a potential tragedy was narrowly averted in Cole Harbour on Friday, September 7th, 2007, during an unfortunate vehicle mishap, and whereas 67-year-old nursery school teacher Sadie Harris was trapped helplessly beneath her car in her driveway, and whereas 5 Good Samaritans, 4 driving motorcycles and 1 in a van, happened to be in the area and immediately responded by quickly coming to the aid of Sadie Harris to lift the vehicle off her and call 911. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly extend our appreciation and thanks to the Good Samaritans Dale Malloy, Alicia Martin, Jason Pye, Chris Snooks, and Danny Vetch for acting quickly and decisively during the vehicle mishap by rescuing Sadie Harris from what could have been a terrible tragedy. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? The motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Italian-Canadian Cultural Association has been active in Halifax for 30 years and currently boasts over 250 memberships, including family memberships, and whereas among its many activities, the Italian-Canadian Cultural Association provides classes in the Italian language, cooking and wood carving, and holds a very popular festival each year. And whereas the Italian-Canadian Cultural Association recently celebrated the grand opening of its striking new building on Agricola Street, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate the Italian-Canadian Cultural Association on the opening of its new facility and thank the association for its years of service to its members and to the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Dartmouth Historical Association instituted the Joseph Howe Fellowship Award to recognize outstanding people who have helped to preserve heritage, culture, or have been leaders in community service, and whereas this award was presented to Edith Rawlings, the first Director of Music for the Dartmouth school system, a position Edith held with distinction for 30 years until 1978, and also author of 2 local history books on Emmanuel Church and North Dartmouth. And whereas Edith's community service includes volunteering at Oakwood Terrace, Stairs United Food Bank, former organist at St. Albans and Emmanuel Churches, and first regent of the Fairfield Chapter IODE. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the Dartmouth Historical Association and Edith Rawlings on the occasion of her Joseph Howe Fellowship Award presentation, and thank her for her many contributions to her community and province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas December 1st is World AIDS Day, a day to remember those living with AIDS and the 8,000 people who die of HIV/AIDS globally every year. And whereas the Red Ribbon Campaign and the HIV/AIDS Awareness Week Planning Committee have served to raise consciousness of AIDS and to provide support to AIDS patients and those who care for them. And whereas Halifax Regional Municipality students in grades 7 to 12 created a stunning red ribbon display on Citadel Hill made of 8,000 flags as a unique memorial for each of the AIDS patients who die every single day. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly thank the organizers of HIV/AIDS Awareness Week and the Nova Scotia students for fostering global solidarity in the fight against AIDS and for their messages of prevention, support, and hope to those living with or affected by HIV/AIDS. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary-minded? Motion is carried. The chatter's getting a little loud and I'm deaf in one ear, so. The Honourable the member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas every year in Canada, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award recognizes individuals who have embarked upon the Young Canadians Challenge. And whereas 16-year-old Fall River resident Stephanie Seamel took the Young Canadians Challenge and participated in community volunteerism and skills training, including ongoing volunteer work at the Beacon House, food bank, and sports activities such as the Challenge 28-kilometer hike around Kejimkujik National Park, and whereas Stephanie Seamel was recently awarded the Bronze Medal of the Duke of Edinburgh's Award by Sport Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Stephanie Seamel for the community service she completed and personal challenges she met to earn the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Writers' Federation of Nova Scotia held their 30th annual Atlantic Writing Competition, and whereas a novel penned by Marcia Pierce Harding entitled Sable's Spirit placed second in this competition and tells the tale of an orphan boy thrown overboard and rescued by a sea captain. And whereas this novel was written to provide insight into the critical role Sable Island played during the Age of Sail, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize retired teacher Marcia Pierce Harding of Liverpool, Nova Scotia on her achievement and second place finish in the 30th annual Atlantic Writing Competition. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Shelburne.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Janice Tugbull of Shelburne, Nova Scotia, represented the town of Shelburne at the provincial volunteer dinner held in Halifax on April the 10th, 2007. And whereas Janice volunteers for the Roseway Hospital Auxiliary, 4-H Club, and the United Baptist Church. Janice is also a member of the Friendship Singers Club. And whereas Janice also volunteers for the Loyal Naomi Lodge, U2 Shop, and the Roseway Hospital Gift Shop. Janice also helps by refreshing hospital patients' water and by assisting with shredding unneeded documents. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Janice Tugbull of Shelburne, Nova Scotia on her dedication, hard work, and volunteering efforts. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas teachers Mary Weber Cook, Jenny Haggart, and Carla McCachran of Thorburn Consolidated School engaged the grade 3 and 4 students in an exercise to plant, care for, and harvest a field of potatoes. And whereas Thorburn School Advisory Council member Debbie Wilson conceived the idea and school neighbor Peter Johnson provided the land, tilled the field, and minded the crop during the summer, and whereas the Pictou County Food Bank reaped the benefits of the Thorburn Consolidated School Potato Project, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend the grade 3 and 4 students of Thorburn Consolidated School, teachers Mary Weber Cook, Jenny Haggart, and Carla McCachran, Thorburn School Advisory Council member Debbie Wilson, and school neighbor Peter Johnson for their community outreach initiative, enthusiasm, and hard work to provide fresh potatoes to the Pictou County Food Bank. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call the order of business for government business, government motions?
Government motions.
We would continue with address and reply to speech from the throne.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Order, order, order.
Thank you very much to my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the opportunity to rise in the House today to make a few comments and to give a few thoughts on the throne speech, Mr. Speaker. But before I do that, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate you, Mr. Speaker, on your appointment. I know that all members of the House share my confidence in your ability to rule over this House with patience and fairness, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to acknowledge, as was done, I know, by the leaders of both the official opposition and the Liberal Party, acknowledge Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor for delivering the speech from the throne, and also the MLA from Hants West and Victoria the Lakes, who moved and seconded the speech from the throne as read by Her Honour, doing a fine job, I might add. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are very fortunate to live in this province, Mr. Speaker, the greatest province in the country and the greatest country in the world, Mr. Speaker. And we're able to do so, Mr. Speaker, because of the brave men and women
who serve our province, many who come from our province, and serving in various parts of the world for peace and democracy, Mr. Speaker, and I salute each and every one of them here tonight. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is as much a community as it is a province. It is home to caring, hardworking people, a natural beauty, and it is filled with opportunity. Our vision will take advantage of those opportunities. We will do that by focusing on the 5 priorities as outlined in the throne speech. Educating to compete, protecting our environment, better roads and infrastructure, safer, healthier communities, and shorter wait times. Mr. Speaker, I have heard a lot of things said over the past number of days about the speech from the throne. Some I agreed with, and I must be honest, some I didn't, Mr. Speaker. Now, I know it comes as quite a surprise, but the opposition really didn't have that much good to say about the throne speech. But listen, Mr. Speaker, to what people around Nova Scotia are saying about our government's 5 priorities, and you will get a much different view from those on the other side. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are educating to compete, and we're able to do so by having more universities per capita than anywhere across other provinces, Mr. Speaker, and by having a community college system which is the envy of all others across the country, and parents and teachers and students, Mr. Speaker, who are making our primary to 12 system the success that it is today. Mr. Speaker, the very day after the speech from the throne, the Canadian Federation of Students said it welcomed the government's direct lend program on student loans. The organization told the media, and I quote, "It will mean students will be saving money." End quote. That's what we're hearing out there. And Mr. Speaker, we will help our students save more money. We are listening to students' concerns about tuition and the cost of borrowing. Mr. Speaker, we will continue with our commitment to reduce tuition costs for our students and improve assistance programs, and the Minister of Education have already begun the feedback gathering from our students across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that not all students choose to go to university. Many will become and have become skilled tradespeople. I know I come from a family of skilled tradespeople. I'm very proud of that. And we are helping them to do that because they are the people who build our province on a daily basis. And we are working to raise the number of certified tradespeople through various apprenticeship programs, moving forward on the next phases of the community college plans and upgrades, while investing in such programs in our primary to 12 system, such as options and opportunities. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know as a government high Canadian dollar and high energy prices are having an impact on our fishermen, our farmers, and our forestry workers. I heard that message today, Mr. Speaker, while in Yarmouth, while they were getting ready to move forward on the traps. I heard that message on the weekend when I dropped in to see the good people of Sheet Harbour. Mr. Speaker, these traditional industries have long been the backbone of the Nova Scotia economy. We recognize and we value their importance. That's why we invested another $37 million in the forestry sector in our province. Mr. Speaker, that's why our agriculture budget was increased this year by 15%, and we moved forward with the Buy Nova Scotia, Buy Local program, Select Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, because Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Agriculture from the beautiful Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley often says in this House, farmers feed us all, Mr. Speaker. Farmers feed us all. Mr. Speaker, the people in these industries continue to come up with new ideas and new business plans to compete in an ever-changing global economy. And the reality is today, Mr. Speaker, we do have an ever-changing global economy, and we recognize that. And we'll continue to work with them, and we'll continue to support them. For some workers, these changes will mean learning new skills And our new Department of Labor and Workforce Development will work with the people of our province to make sure they are able to stay here in Nova Scotia and help build our future. Now, Mr. Speaker, building that future means protecting our environment. Again, another one of our priorities, which the Minister of Environment, I might say, is more passionate than any minister across this great nation of ours when it comes to the environment. Now, again, some members of the official opposition can't find anything good to say about our plans. Now, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, they're out of touch with those closest to this issue. Take, for example, the designation of the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes Wilderness Area, Mr. Speaker, a great initiative for the people of our province. Now, while the opposition, the official opposition, was clamoring for press, environmental groups were congratulating us on taking the lead in protecting our environment. Speaker. Here is what the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society said about our plan, and I quote, "This is the single most important thing the province could have done to protect the ecology of the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes area," end quote, Mr. Speaker. That is what they're saying out there, Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems that the NDP really is alone in the wilderness on this particular issue, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I assure you, Mr. Speaker, our work on the environment, Mr. Speaker.
That's why we protect the wilderness.
Mr. Speaker, I assure you, Mr. Speaker, our work on the environment is only beginning, including such initiatives as our coastal management framework, which we'll move forward upon in the next 2 years. We will take advantage of the best wind conditions in the country and the highest tides in the world in the Bay of Fundy, Mr. Speaker. These factors will help us reach our target of becoming the cleanest and greenest province in Canada, Mr. Speaker, Canada. Mr. Speaker, the task ahead is great, and it requires our full attention. Hence, we will establish a Department of Environment to ensure we are prepared to meet the environmental challenges coming our way. And we know there are challenges coming our way. Now, simply put, Mr. Speaker, and I know all members of this House see this on a daily basis in their own ridings. I see this in my own riding, Mr. Speaker. Simply put, our province has an infrastructure deficit. We need better roads, schools, hospitals, recreational facilities, libraries, and internet connections, Mr. Speaker. That's why we have made better roads and infrastructure one of our priorities as a government. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know you don't hear this from the other side, but the work is already underway. In fact, the Minister of Education and I today took part in the official opening of the $32 million Halifax Citadel School just up the hill from here today, Mr. Speaker. One of many accomplishments of our government, Mr. Speaker. Just a couple of weeks ago, we announced a deal with the federal government worth over $600 million while enacting this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while the official opposition would chide us for having a positive relationship with the federal government, the people who use our roads and buildings or log on to the internet are encouraging us to continue with our hard work by getting those dollars, Mr. Speaker. And it is that type of hard work, Mr. Speaker, which saw us get a deal on the Atlantic Accord and will see this province become and continue to remain the full beneficiary of our offshore for the people of Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, in speaking about the announcement, which was attended by my honourable colleague, the Deputy Premier in Antigonish, as well as the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, Mr. Speaker, The Nova Scotia Chambers of Commerce said this, and I quote, "The deal will help shore up some of our infrastructure needs. We'll also see a direct connection to the Atlantic Gateway with the increased twinning of Highway 104, which will benefit our entire province," Mr. Speaker, end quote. End quote. That's what people are saying out there. Again, Mr. Speaker, the official opposition is on the road to nowhere when it comes to this issue and their criticism, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, some would question the idea of strategic infrastructure partnerships, which we talked about in our speech from the throne.
Order,
We have
please.
an excited bunch
Order.
tonight, Mr. Speaker.
I realize everybody is well rested after the weekend, but we need some quiet so we can hear.
Mr. Speaker, I tend to be generating some interest from across the floor. Now, Mr. Speaker, some would question the idea, as I said, of strategic infrastructure partnerships. Now, we are using those partnerships now, and if we want to provide more services for our fellow Nova Scotians, those partnerships need to grow. Remember that the next time you see an ambulance, Mr. Speaker, because emergency health services is a great example of how we can work strategically with the private sector to improve our services, Mr. Speaker. It's a great example. And Mr. Speaker, I think it is only fair that I acknowledge the work of the previous government before 1999 for putting that plan in place, Mr. Speaker. They deserve the credit for doing that, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's working all across our country, from the Confederation Bridge here in the Maritimes to the John Labatt Centre in London, Ontario, to Kelowna's Skyreach Place in British Columbia. There are those, Mr. Speaker, who would criticize that, but I believe we need to take an increasing look at those opportunities, Mr. Speaker, provided we do it in a sensible way, provided we do it with doing the appropriate filter in place. Now, Mr. Speaker, I lost my place for a moment, Mr. Speaker. There are those who would put a halt. Oh, now I remember, Mr. Speaker. How could I forget this? Now, there would be those who would put. Again, Mr. Speaker, they're quite excited on the other side. Well, Mr. Speaker, speaking of the official opposition, once again, there are those who will put a halt to development. I know you find that hard to believe here in the downtown. Now, there are those in the official opposition who have derailed plans for new buildings in downtown Halifax, Mr. Speaker. This despite widespread support from business leaders who recognize the need for more office, retail, and living space, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's no question that we as a government and we in this party are proud of our heritage and our culture, Mr. Speaker. There's no question about that. No question. Speaker, it's why we've increased our support for heritage in Nova Scotia. It's why we're going to double the amount of money we put into culture in Nova Scotia over the next 3 years. But, Mr. Speaker, but that heritage can't prevent us from looking to the future and building our economy, and we will ensure that we have that balance, unlike the other side, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to that issue. Now, Mr. Speaker, something that, switching topics, something that is very near and dear to my heart, and I know it's very near and dear to many in this chamber's heart, is that of the opportunities that we see with Atlantic Gateway. And you have to look no further than out here at the port of Halifax to see the opportunities. It will benefit people from Yarmouth straight through to Sydney, Mr. Speaker. Now, we know that we have a great opportunity to attract ships, Mr. Speaker, from Asia and India. And when they come through the Suez Canal, the Port of Halifax, the Strait of Council Port, Sydney, and others will be ready to unload those containers, Mr. Speaker. We have deep water, we have ice-free ports, and not only that, Mr. Speaker, more importantly, we have the talent here in our province that can deal with this issue, Mr. Speaker. Every time a container is taken off one of those ships, it creates 4,600 hours of work. Thousands of jobs will result, Mr. Speaker, from the plan that we are doing and moving forward upon in the future, Mr. Speaker. The future is upon us, and it is up to us to make sure we take and are ready to take advantage of it. Our focus on better roads and infrastructure is proof that we are ready. While ensuring that our communities grow economically, there is no greater need to make sure our communities are safe. And I know my honourable colleague, the Minister of Justice, knows that, and he knows that in his own community. I know the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General, who did a fine job, I might add, Mr. Speaker, in his Minister. As a former police officer, he recognizes that, Mr. Speaker, and the good people of Cumberland County, who have been very supportive of this government, Mr. Speaker. That is why safer, healthier communities is one of the other priorities for this government on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We are putting more police officers on the street. We are forcing drug dealers out of our communities, Mr. Speaker, and we are implementing all recommendations of the Nunn Report, and we are fighting for tougher changes to the Youth Criminal Justice Act, Mr. Speaker, and we are calling on our federal government to do so, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, as one example, we believe hospitals have a duty to report gunshots and stabbings to police. Even the most staunchest critic of my government was forced to admit it was a good idea, Mr. Speaker. Now, the president of the NSGEU told the Halifax Herald that our legislation could make for good policy. Speaking of hospital staff, she said, and I quote, it really, I'll have to read this quote, Mr. Speaker, it really kind of takes the onus off them because they'll have to report it now rather than wondering if it should be reported, end quote. Now, if the leader of the NSGEU is convinced we're doing the right thing, Mr. Speaker, I'm fully convinced it must be right. Mr. Speaker, I'm fully convinced. Well, I'm sure that quote will be brought up to me at another future time, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, the opposition parties say that our legislation aimed at making our streets and communities safer is too broad, Mr. Speaker. I say by improving crosswalk safety and putting strict penalties in place for street racing, we are showing the type of leadership that Nova Scotians expect and deserve from their government, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, of course, making our streets and communities safer and healthier is about more than just crime prevention. It's about making sure Nova Scotians have jobs and access to medical treatment, Mr. Speaker, and we are doing that. The number of Nova Scotians living in poverty has fallen by 35% between 1996 and 2005, Mr. Speaker. 65,000 more Nova Scotians are working today than in 1996, Mr. Speaker. Those are results, Mr. Speaker. And we now have the lowest unemployment rate in a generation, Mr. Speaker. Those are results. Mr. Speaker, thousands of more jobs, Mr. Speaker, means more tax revenue. Money that we continue to put into new social programs and continue to invest in important social programs. We recognize that there is a balance, Mr. Speaker. Today, perhaps, provides no better example. I joined the Honourable Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker, who I also might add is doing a fine job on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I joined that honourable member today, Mr. Speaker, for Mr. Speaker, today this government, Mr. Speaker, and our party delivered on a platform promise, and Mr. Speaker, I might add that we are the only party to do so, Mr. Speaker. We will make sure that through the Nova Scotia Pharmacare program that every single person in our province will have access to prescription drugs, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have 180,000 people who don't have private drug plans, Mr. Speaker. And in our Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, no one will be left behind. I can assure you that. No one will be left behind. Now, Mr. Speaker, a key component of healthier and safer communities is providing quality health care. And when we start to talk about health care, we hear about wait times. Now, we recognize that wait times are too long. And we've made shorter wait times. Yes. And we've made, Mr. Speaker, now the official opposition claps for longer wait times. I certainly don't, Mr. Speaker. Now, when we started talking about health care, we recognized that shorter wait times need to be a priority. And Mr. Speaker, in all seriousness, that's why we have put this forward as a priority. And I know that each member of this House faces this issue regardless of what area they represent in Nova Scotia. The proof of that is certainly evident. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about some of the things our government has done. The ground is broken on a $17 million emergency room at the QE2 here in Halifax. Construction is underway on a new $155 million hospital for the good people of Turl and Colchester, Mr. Speaker. The Valley Regional Hospital is being expanded. New MRIs will cut wait times in half. New digital screening units allow for mammograms for twice as many patients in any given day. And there will be a wait time guarantee, Mr. Speaker, for cancer radiation therapy. And I know that many of us have been touched in one way or another by what is an awful disease, Mr. Speaker. Now, while the opposition members say they have a plan, Mr. Speaker, with wait times, they actually don't say how that plan would be implemented. They don't say how much that plan would actually cost, Mr. Speaker, nor do they say how much taxes would have to go up for their vague ideas, Mr. Speaker. That's what they're not telling the people of Nova Scotia. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? The good people of Nova Scotia deserve to know the truth, and they deserve to know what the plan really is, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, our plan.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, our plan is based on reality, Mr. Speaker. We made real commitments, and we're delivering on those promises. We have more doctors per capita than any other province in the country, Mr. Speaker. More nurses are coming to our province, and 80% of our graduates are staying at home upon graduation, Mr. Speaker. We have more, Mr. Speaker, we are opening more beds for seniors throughout our province. In fact, we'll open over 800 more beds, Mr. Speaker, because we recognize that we need to free up many of our acute care beds in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, because it is a problem. And yes, Mr. Speaker, my government and I will be the voice for mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, seniors, and those with special needs, while being fair to our workers by ending strikes and the potential for strikes in our health care system, Mr. Speaker, for our population. Now, Mr. Speaker, there is something, Mr. Speaker, there is something that I do agree with the Leader of the Opposition on, Mr. Speaker. I do agree with him on something. It appears he was absolutely correct when he announced in this House on Friday, and I quote, that Nova Scotia has the best health care system in the country, Mr. Speaker. End quote. I absolutely agree with him, Mr. Speaker, remember our 5 priorities. Educating to compete, protecting the environment, better roads and infrastructure, safe, healthier communities, shorter wait times, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of our vision for the future, and I believe Nova Scotians share that same pride and vision for our province.
Order. 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 The Honourable, the member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Hear, hear! Hear, hear! Becky King, Becky King. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you.
There you go.
Good evening, Mr. Speaker. Thank you all. It's with great honor and pride that I stand before you this evening in this historic chamber with my mom and dad present, to offer my remarks on behalf of the people of Cole Harbour and Eastern